Hello and welcome back to Shakesyear. We are working on the troublesome reign of King John, and today we get to hear from the bastard in Act 2, Scene 4. But before we get there, just real quick, the stuff that has been going on. We have Louis and his army from France coming to attack England and oust King John because a bunch of English nobles are really upset with the way that John has been governing, and sort of the straw that broke the camel's back was Arthur's death, which technically wasn't John's fault, but it kind of sort of was because he had him taken captive. But whatever, that's neither here nor there. The English nobles don't like him, so they are siding with Louis the Dauphin of France, who is invading England. And in Act 2, Scene 3, he said that as he's been invading, a lot of people in the towns are just sort of laying down their arms, and they're welcoming Louis with open arms, saying, yes, please come in and save us from John. So that all seems hunky-dory, but Louis also doesn't trust any of the English lords that have come over to side with him, because he's like, they are traitors to John, so what's to stop them from becoming traitors to me at a later time? So he and the French nobles have decided that as soon as they win, as soon as they've ousted John, they're going to get rid of the English nobles. So that's where all of that stands. Meanwhile, John had been excommunicated, and Cardinal Pandolf said, well, like, you can have your crown back if you give it up. Like, you can be welcomed back into the church if you give up your crown, which John very reluctantly decided to do because that was his only choice once he found out that Louis was invading. So at the top of Act 2, Scene 4, we are near Bury St. Edmunds, and Pandolf absolves King John of all of his sins and gives him his crown back, saying, you know, welcome to the fold, you are recoronated, you are King John again. And then a messenger comes in to say that Louis and his army are approaching, and Pandolf is like, don't worry about it, don't worry about it, you now have the backing of the church, the army in Rome will stand behind you, you are the rightful King of England. So Louis and Malone and various assorted and sundry nobles, both from England and France, show up. This is like Louis's whole faction. They show up, they enter, and Louis sort of shames Pandolf for siding with John. Like, you know, this guy did all these terrible things, and now the church just like forgives him. And Pandolf is like, yeah, he did what he was supposed to do, and we forgive him. So we don't need to have this whole war thing anymore. You can just like dismiss your army and go on back to France. Like, you're not needed here anymore. And Louis is like, no, that's not really how this whole thing works. I'm here because I have the rightful claim to the throne. And Pandolf is like, no, you don't anymore. So you better back down or things are going to get real bad. And Malone jumps in saying, like, how do you, like, it's your fault that Louis is here doing this in the first place. Louis is here to defend the church because you excommunicated John. So Louis is here to get rid of this threat to the church. How do you tell him to muster an army and go to war one day and then just on a whim decide that no, war is not going to happen anymore? And the bastard replies, my Lord of Malone, what title had the prince to England and the crown of Albion, but such a title as the Pope confirmed? The prelate now lets fall his feigned claim. Louis is but the agent for the Pope. Then must the Dauphin cease, sith he hath ceased. But, cease or no, it greatly matters not, if you, my lords and barons of the land, will leave the French and cleave unto your king. For shame, ye peers of England, suffer not yourselves, your honors, and your land to fall, but with resolved thoughts beat back the French and free the land from yoke of servitude. So this is the bastard once again, like, lawyering up in this situation. He's like, Malone, Louis is here fighting on behalf of the Pope, and the Pope is now saying stop. Like, what authority does Louis even have to be fighting other than what was given to him by the Pope? And the Pope doesn't want to be fighting anymore. So the Pope absolutely can say, nope, don't fight anymore. So Louis better stop because the Pope is telling him to stop. And then he turns to the English nobles that are following Louis, and he's like, but whether or not Louis complies, that doesn't matter because you all are English and you shouldn't be fighting against your country anyway. So if you just come back over to our side and side with King John, then no harm, no foul. And also Lewis no longer has a large enough army to be able to mount an attack, so that like this war doesn't have to happen if you just come back to the right side. You're English, come back to the English side. But the nobles don't go for it. So Pandulph quickly excommunicates Lewis and everybody who is following him. And they all leave except for John and Pandulph and the bastard. And John is so upset by this, because the whole reason that he gave up his crown in the first place to come back to the church was because that's how he thought he was going to be able to avoid war. And he thought that everybody was just going to go back to, yes, you are the rightful king, but now this war is going to happen anyway. So he's like, whether or not I gave up my crown, whether or not I submitted to the church, which again was a really big thing for him, because he thought it went, God, then him, then the church, then everybody else. He's like, the only reason why I submitted to the church, like swapping that order, was to avoid war. And now war's going to happen anyway. Like, this is not what I was hoping for. So he's very upset, and Pandulph is like, no, you did the right thing. Yeah, everything's going to be fine. And he exits. And then the bastard sort of cozies up to John, and he's like, no, it's fine, because I have an army that's ready to go. I have archers, I have swordsmen, I have all these people. They are ready to fight on your behalf. So we are absolutely going to win this thing against Lewis. And John's like, hey, okay, yeah, fine, let's go to war. And that's the end of that scene. So interesting how that all plays out, with the bastard once again like pleading with the nobles, come back over to this side, with Lewis still standing his ground, and with King John now his power seems to be sort of waning. He has submitted to the church. Now he's following the suggestion of the bastard. He feels a little lost at this point. He doesn't quite have the same puffed upness that he once did. So anyway, that's the end of Act 2, Scene 4 in this version of the play, which is sort of equivalent to like the second half of Act 5, Scene 2 of Shakespeare's version of the play, except in Shakespeare's version, John's not in the scene. The scene starts out between Lewis and Salisbury has this long speech about how sad it is that he has to be fighting against his own country, and then Pandulph comes in and says to Lewis, the king has recanted and everything's fine, so you can lay down your arms. But Lewis is like, too late, the war machine is already going, so we got to keep on that path. And then the bastard shows up like on behalf of the king to speak on behalf of John to find out if Lewis is in compliance, and when he sees that he's not and that Lewis still wants to go to war, they like throw some nasty words and some threatening words of war back and forth at each other. And it's kind of a nice moment for the bastard in Shakespeare's version to get to step into this role of power. Whereas in this version, he's still sort of subservient to the king, saying, like, I have this army that can fight for you. I have this army that can fight for you. Whereas in Shakespeare's version, when you see the bastard talking on behalf of the king, he just gets to assert his own power against Lewis. So it's just a different power dynamic. So again, as it has been through most of this play, very similar ground is covered in these scenes. We have King John coming back to the church. We have Pandulph telling Lewis we don't have to fight anymore. We have Lewis not liking that answer, and war is still imminent. It's just where the focus goes in each of these and what the power dynamics are. So in this one, King John was still there, and he's listening to the bastard and maybe a little bit deflated at this point, but war is still coming. And if you come on back in the next couple of days, we will see what the result of that will be. I'll see you tomorrow for more. Mwah.